Hello, so we're going to look at evaluating tradable pollution permit schemes and look at really how effective they are and any particular limitations that they may face. So, first of all, obviously with a tradable pollution permit, we're looking to try and get towards the social optimum where possible, and obviously make sure pollution is at a particular limit that is socially optimal. But how do we decide on that social optimum level of pollution? So again, we've got a difficulty with what is the right amount of pollution and how do we calculate that? So issue number one, decide on social optimum. So we've got the issue of what is the social optimum level of pollution? Do we know it? And there's many debates about what the social optimum would be. Then second point we may wish to consider is difficulties in measuring the amount of pollution. So what we may face is difficulties in measuring exactly how much CO2, how much carbon dioxide has been generated, and therefore difficult to know whether a firm has broken, meaning i.e. they've exceeded their limit, the limit that they had on their emissions, or not. So it's difficult to measure the pollution, therefore we don't know whether firms have broken their limit or not. Again, there's an issue of government failure here with regards to administrative costs. So administrative costs with regards to setting up the tradable pollution permit scheme and enforcing the rules around them. So there are administrative costs that are associated with this, which is an example of government failure. So this is administrative cost in running the scheme and also enforcing it. So it's no good just running it. There's costs involved there, but there's also costs involved in enforcing it, making sure people are following the rules. Other issue that we may face with regards to a tradable pollution permit scheme is that fines need to be large enough. So the potential issue that could arise is obviously if the fines are particularly small, firms may just go, well, actually, we're not going to bother buying the necessary permits off other firms. All we're just going to do is we're just going to pollute and we'll take the fine because the fine's only very small. And actually, the fine may be less than the cost of buying a pollution permit or reducing the amount of pollution. So therefore it's going to be ineffective. So obviously the fine, if it's very large, is going to encourage firms to make sure that they obey by the rules. Otherwise they will be heavily punished. So it's only really going to be effective if those fines are large enough to ensure that firms follow the rules. Fines need to be large enough to ensure firms only pollute what they are allowed. So we just need to explain if fines are less than the cost of reducing pollution or buying permits. So if the fines are less than the cost of reducing pollution or buying permits, firms may pollute over their limit. So they may break the rules and actually just continue polluting large amounts. Okay, so that's another point that we need to be wary of. Are fines large enough? Another point we may wish to consider is we may see geographical concentration of pollution. And what we mean by geographical, not population. Let me just scribble that out, pollution. So what we may see with the geographical concentration of pollution is you may see, for example, if there is a worldwide pollution permit scheme, what you may see is that you may see certain countries with very dominant firms, for example, who have large amounts of capital. They may use their financial power in order to purchase large amounts of pollution permits off the rest of the world, and actually what you may see is therefore the pollution is concentrated in a particular area. Maybe, let's say, the United States. If the United States firms, for example, bought a load of pollution permits off firms in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Okay, so therefore all you're doing is moving the pollution from one area to another, and actually the concentration of that pollution in one particular area may actually be more damaging to society due to the concentration of the pollution in the one particular area. So the example of where we saw the geographical concentration of pollution, as I kind of alluded to moments ago, is you saw that with the Kyoto Protocol, so if you don't know about the Kyoto Protocol, that may be something you wish to have a look at. So with the Kyoto Protocol, firms in the USA bought up excess tradable pollution permits from LEDCs, or less economically developed countries, leading to a concentration of pollution in the USA. So obviously particularly bad for citizens of the USA. One of the main things that we need with a tradable pollution permit scheme is it needs international cooperation. Obviously, pollution is a global market failure, and obviously if you have only a certain number of countries participating in it, so let's say every country in the world apart from China took part in the tradable pollution permit scheme, yes, that would have a significant effect, having the majority of the countries, but having China, one of the leading polluter in the world, not involved in the tradable pollution permit scheme is going to really minimize the impact that it could potentially have. So need international cooperation. Pollution is a global market failure. So you need all countries on board, otherwise it really isn't going to be that effective. Okay. Issues we may face, particularly firms are known to be footloose, especially multinational corporations. So multinational corporations are footloose. What that means is they tend to move from country to country. So the idea that they are footloose, they move from country to country. Why do they move from country to country? Well, it's there to avoid these pollution permit schemes. Does that mean the market failure is addressed? No, it just means the problem is still going to be around. So yeah, firms are footloose, they move from country to country, and by moving from country to country, they avoid the pollution permit schemes, and therefore it really doesn't tackle the issue of pollution. And really, we need firms to make sure that they can actually reduce the amount of pollution that they generate. So it depends on firms' ability to reduce pollution. So if there are too few permits, we may see firms closing down, for example. So if not enough permits, so if there's not enough permits, firms may find it difficult to reduce pollution due to the cost. So if not enough permits, firms may find it difficult to reduce pollution due to the cost, and as a result, firms may close. And this would be an example of government failure. So if firms aren't able to reduce the amount of pollution, maybe because there's not enough permits, then actually you may find firms actually have to close down because it's just going to cost them too much to reduce the amount of pollution, and it may actually close down. And that would be an example of government failure if firms had to close down because there weren't enough permits. There is also the other issue. There may be too many permits. So if there's too many permits, it's going to mean still high levels of pollution, and therefore it's going to reduce incentive to switch to green technology. Because if you think about it, if the supply of the permits is particularly large, it's going to mean a far lower price for the permits, and therefore the cost of switching to green technology is just going to be far greater than that of having extra permits. So too many permits, there's going to be high levels of pollution. There's going to be a decrease in incentives to switch to green technology. High supply of permits is going to mean low price. Firms can buy additional permits to continue polluting. So actually, if the too many permits are produced and allowed onto the market, firms may go, actually, well, the price of these permits is so low that if I wanted to purchase a few more permits to continue polluting the way they currently are, then they'll just go, well, actually, we're just going to buy these extra pollution permits. They're not very expensive, and we can just carry on doing what we're doing, because there is really no incentive to switch to green technology because there just is too many permits. Okay, so just to recap some of the points. Difficult to decide on what the social optimum amount of pollution is. It's going to be difficult in measuring pollution. There are going to be administrative costs, which is an example of government failure, obviously running the scheme and enforcing it. We need to ensure that fines are large enough so that firms obey these, because if the fines are less than the cost of reducing pollution or buying the permits, firms are just going to break the rules and pollute more than they are actually allowed to. We may see geographical concentrations of pollution if firms in particular areas buy up all the pollution permits, and obviously that's going to be detrimental to those particular areas. It needs international cooperation as it's a global market failure. You can't just have a few areas of the world doing it. You need everyone on board with it, otherwise it's not going to be effective, particularly because firms are footloose. So firms like to move from country to country and avoid these pollution permit schemes, and therefore obviously it doesn't resolve the issue, because it just means the problem goes from one place to another place, and obviously as it's a pollution, it's a global issue that we need to tackle. Firms may actually may go out of business if not enough pollution permits are available. So another example of government failure. And also, if too many permits are put onto the market, there's no incentive for firms to switch to greener technology or reduce their output to reduce their pollution, because firms can just buy additional permits to continue polluting. So those are the key things that we need to consider when we're thinking about tradable pollution permits, and actually how effective are they?